Hello, everyone, and welcome to Vale of Hearts, a place where love finds its way through the quietest corners of the soul. Tonight's story begins not with a kiss, but with an insult. In a glittering Chicago restaurant where power wears a tuxedo and danger smells like expensive cologne, a mafia boss mocks a waitress in a language he thinks she doesn't understand. But when she replies, flawlessly, in his mother tongue, the entire room freezes. Because this simple waitress just revealed a secret that could burn his empire to the ground. What follows is a tangled dance of love, lies, and laughter, where a woman undercover will outsmart a man who's never been outplayed. And maybe, just maybe, steal his heart in the process. Welcome to Beneath the City of Glass, a story where romance meets danger, and even the coldest hearts can still find warmth under the city lights. The Waitress and the Mafia King. The night in Chicago glittered like spilled diamonds, cold, sharp, and breathtaking. Inside Luna Bianca, the city's most expensive Italian restaurant, people spoke in whispers worth millions. Waiters glided through the dim golden light, the scent of truffle and wine hung heavy in the air, and a string quartet played something that sounded heartbreakingly perfect. And there, weaving through the polished chaos, was Elena Voss, dark hair in a neat bun, crisp uniform pressed within an inch of its life, and a calm that didn't belong to a woman carrying 3 glasses of vintage Barolo in one hand and a federal microphone sewn into her sleeve. To everyone, she was just another elegant waitress. To the Department of Justice, she was Agent Voss. 30 days undercover, 3 wiretaps installed, and 1 wrong look away from getting herself killed. Table 5 was her assignment tonight. 5 men in suits so black they looked like they'd been cut from the night itself. At the center of them sat Silvio Moretti, a man whose reputation walked into the room before he did. He was dangerous, yes, but also disarmingly composed, the kind of man who smiled like he'd already won. He swirled his whiskey lazily, talking in Italian so fast most Americans wouldn't catch a word. But Elena did. She approached with the wine, posture straight, eyes soft, heartbeat steady. Silvio's gaze lifted to her and lingered, studying her face like it was a riddle. Then he leaned toward one of his men and muttered something under his breath, quiet, dismissive, cutting. "She has the hands of a servant," he said in Italian, "but eyes like someone who's tasted champagne and sin." His men chuckled, low and ugly. Elena's hand didn't tremble. She simply poured the wine, tilted her head slightly, and replied, also in Italian, her voice smooth as silk and twice as sharp. "Careful, signore. Women who know secrets tend to survive longer than men who tell them." The laughter died instantly. One of the men coughed. Another stared. Silvio froze, then slowly leaned back in his chair. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes did. They sharpened, darkened, flickered with something that looked disturbingly like intrigue. "You speak Italian," he said finally, switching to English with that rich accent that made even insults sound like flirtation. "Fluently," she replied, still smiling. "It helps when the guests forget their manners." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Silvio laughed. A slow, rich laugh that rolled through the table like warm smoke. "Molto interessante," he murmured. "A waitress with a backbone. How refreshing." Elena arched an eyebrow. "You should get out more then." That earned her a few snickers from his men. But Silvio wasn't laughing now. He was looking at her as if he'd just discovered a secret passage in his own house. Something about her voice, her posture, the way she didn't flinch, it all felt too deliberate. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena?" "Pretty," he said. "Sounds expensive." "Only if you spell it right," she shot back without missing a beat. His smirk deepened, and she knew she'd just stepped into dangerous territory. The kind where wit could get you noticed, and being noticed could get you killed. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers steepled. "Tell me, Elena, what does a woman like you do serving wine to men like us?" "Pay rent," she replied lightly, "and practice my people skills." "How's that going?" "So far, 7 out of 10. "You're the 3. His men laughed again, but this time Silvio didn't stop them. He was too busy watching her, and she could feel it. The shift, the spark, the invisible line being crossed. She set down the bottle, smiled professionally, and started to leave. That's when his voice stopped her, quiet but commanding, the kind that didn't need to be loud to carry weight. "Come upstairs," he said. "Excuse me?" "Upstairs. I have a private office. You and I should talk. I'm still on shift." That wasn't a question. Elena turned slightly, met his eyes, and said in a tone sweet enough to sting, "If you're trying to scare me, you'll have to get in line." He smiled, slow and wolfish. "Oh, I don't want to scare you, Elena. I just want to know who you really are." And with that, he stood. His men rose with him, a ripple of dark suits moving in perfect unison. As they stepped toward the elevator, Silvio turned back one last time. "Don't keep me waiting." The elevator doors slid shut, and for the first time all night, Elena exhaled. Her earpiece crackled with static, followed by the impatient voice of Agent Mark Rivers, her handler. "Voss, what the hell did you just do?" She kept her tone calm, even playful. "You told me to blend in." "Yeah, not flirt with the devil." "Relax, he just thinks I'm a waitress with a bad attitude." "You don't say." Elena rolled her eyes, grabbed a tray, and started toward the service corridor. Beneath the humor, though, her pulse raced. Getting called upstairs by Silvio Moretti wasn't part of the plan. Neither was attracting his interest. She was supposed to observe, not improvise. But plans, she reminded herself, were like glass. They looked solid until someone threw a rock. As she slipped into the back hall, one of the cooks, an old Italian man named Bruno, whistled. "Careful, ragazza," he said with a wink. "That one he bites," Elena grinned. "Good thing I'm not on the menu." In the small mirror near the elevator, she caught her reflection. Flushed cheeks, calm eyes, the faintest curve of a smirk. She looked nothing like the scared rookie she'd been 6 months ago. Tonight, she looked like someone who belonged in this world, maybe too much. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open, reflecting the skyline of Chicago like a sea of fire and glass. For a second, she hesitated. She thought of her father, the judge who'd lost his life trying to bring men like Silvio down. She thought of the promise she'd made when she joined the DOJ. Justice, no matter the cost. She stepped in. The doors closed behind her with a whisper. Her heart thudded once, twice. Then she smiled to herself, whispered into the mic. "Control, this is Voss, moving to phase 2. On the other end, Rivers sighed. "Elena, please tell me you're not walking into his office." "Relax," she murmured as the elevator ascended, her reflection splitting into 100 shards across the mirrored walls. "It's just a conversation." Pause, then dryly, "Yeah, that's how every good funeral starts." Elena laughed softly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear as the elevator reached the top floor. The doors opened with a soft ding, revealing a world of glass, gold, and quiet danger. Somewhere between fear and curiosity, she realized something. Silvio Moretti might be her target, but tonight, she was walking straight into his story. And maybe, just maybe, he'd already started walking into hers. The elevator doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing a hallway bathed in golden light and silence thick enough to make her ears ring. Everything up here was glass, chrome, and money, the kind of place where even the air seemed filtered through confidence. Elena stepped out, her heart steady, her smile ready. The same calm mask she'd worn through interrogations, gunfire, and 3 weeks of pretending to care about rich people's pasta. But this was different. This was personal. At the end of the hall, 2 double glass doors stood open. Beyond them, she heard faint Italian music, something old and haunting, a waltz from another century. Silvio Moretti stood by the window, back turned, staring down at the city like a king watching over his kingdom. His jacket was gone, sleeves rolled to his elbows, posture relaxed in a way that somehow looked more dangerous. He didn't turn as she entered. "You made me wait," he said, his tone casual but edged. "Traffic," she replied lightly. He looked over his shoulder, raising an eyebrow. "You took the elevator." "Chicago traffic's everywhere, even vertically," she said, and that earned her the faintest flicker of amusement, small but real. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. She sat, crossing her legs, posture calm, composed. Every inch the unbothered woman he didn't yet know was wired. The room around them was immaculate. Black marble floors, whiskey on the side table, a pistol on the desk, half hidden beneath the lamplight. Not staged, just honest. Silvio poured himself a drink, the sound of the whiskey filling the silence. "You surprised me, Elena," he said. "Not many people do that," she smiled. "Guess I'm full of bad habits." "Where did you learn Italian?" he asked, voice smooth but watching her closely. "Rome," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I lived there for a while." "Really?" He leaned forward slightly, swirling his glass. "I know Rome well." "What part?" "The noisy part," she said with a faint grin. "The one full of tourists and bad decisions." That made him chuckle quietly, but his eyes didn't soften. "And what brought you there?" "A man," she said simply. That word caught his attention like a hook. "Ah," he murmured. "Now we're getting interesting." "What kind of man?" "The kind who thought he owned the world," she said, leaning back. "And the kind who was wrong." He smirked, intrigued. "I like your honesty." "I wasn't being honest," she replied smoothly. Silvio laughed, a quiet, genuine sound that almost made her forget the gun on his desk. "So this man," he said after a moment, "does he have a name?" She let her gaze meet his, steady, daring. "Moretti." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through glass. For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly he set down his glass. "That's a bold joke," he said, voice quiet. "Who said it was a joke?" His expression hardened, amusement slipping into something colder. "You've got a dangerous sense of humor." "I prefer dangerous company," she said evenly. He studied her, and she could almost feel his thoughts shifting. Calculation, curiosity, suspicion. Then he stood and walked around the desk, stopping behind her. His reflection appeared beside hers in the glass wall, dark and imposing. "Who sent you?" he asked quietly. "To serve wine?" "To spy." She tilted her head slightly, eyes flicking toward him. "Do I look like a spy?" He leaned in closer, his voice low enough to feel on her skin. "You look like trouble, and I have a weakness for trouble." She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes, only inches apart. "Then maybe you should fix that." He smiled faintly, too calm, too quiet. Then he called out something in Italian. The office door opened instantly, and two of his men stepped inside, tall, sharp, and ready. "Boss?" one asked. "She knows too much," Silvio said without looking away from her. Her pulse skipped, but her expression didn't change. One of the men moved forward, reaching for her arm, and that was when Silvio raised a hand. "Wait." The bodyguard froze mid-step. The tension in the air twisted like a held breath. Silvio turned away, walking back to his desk, unhurried. He sat down again, leaned back, and regarded her as though reevaluating a painting. "Killing you would be too easy," he said finally, voice smooth again. "And I hate easy." Elena allowed herself a breath, controlled, quiet. "Good to know I'm not boring you." His mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Not yet." He poured another drink, motioned for the men to leave. The door shut behind them, sealing the silence back in. He took a sip, eyes still on her. "Tell me something, Elena. Do you speak Russian?" Her brow lifted slightly. "A little?" "Good," he said, setting the glass down. "Tomorrow night I'm meeting some business partners from Moscow. I need a translator. You'll be there. Why me?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. "Because I don't trust anyone else in this building," he said flatly. "Someone's been leaking information. Maybe you'll help me find out who." Her heart rate picked up, but she smiled faintly. "So you're hiring the woman you almost killed?" "I'm practical," he said. "And you're different?" "Different how?" "You don't flinch," he said simply. "People who don't flinch either have nothing to lose, or something to hide." Elena tilted her head, returning his gaze. "And which do you think I am?" "I haven't decided yet." They stared at each other for a moment longer, the silence between them strangely charged. Not just tension, but curiosity, something unspoken neither wanted to name. Then she stood, If that's all, I should get back to my actual job. That is your job now, he said. Be here tomorrow at 7. Don't be late. I'm never late, she said, already walking toward the door. I doubt that, he replied, but I have a feeling you'll surprise me. She turned just before the door closed, offering a small smile. You have no idea. The elevator ride down felt longer than before. Her reflection flickered in the mirrored walls, sharp, calm, unreadable, exactly how she'd trained herself to be. Her earpiece crackled again. Voss, Agent Rivers hissed. What the hell happened up there? She smirked faintly. I got promoted, he barked. To what? To translator, she said, watching the numbers descend. Moscow meeting. Tomorrow night. There was a pause, then a long sigh. You realize this could blow the entire operation? Or finish it, she said quietly. Or finish you, he muttered. Relax, she said, stepping out of the elevator. I've had worse dates. She pulled out her phone as she walked through the quiet hallway, pretending to check messages while her heart raced. A private meeting, Russians, information leaks. If she could access whatever data they were trading, she'd have everything she needed to burn Silvio's empire down. But beneath that sharp, focused thought was another one. Softer, quieter, more dangerous. His voice, his stare, that small, rare laugh. She shook her head, almost laughing at herself. She was supposed to be untouchable, detached, but something about him had slipped under her skin like a song she couldn't stop hearing. As she stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights reflected in the restaurant windows like 100 watchful eyes. Chicago hummed around her, alive and indifferent. Somewhere above, 30 floors up, Silvio Moretti was probably still standing by his window, sipping his whiskey, already thinking of her. And for the first time in a long time, Elena wasn't sure who was hunting who. The next morning began with rain. Soft, steady, the kind that turned Chicago's skyline into watercolor. From the 31st floor of the Moretti Tower, the city looked peaceful, almost innocent, like it wasn't built on bribes and blood. Elena stood by the wide window, coffee in hand, pretending she wasn't trapped. Silvio had called it temporary accommodation. She called it what it was, a glass prison with silk sheets and perfect views. He'd assigned her a driver, a schedule, a security detail that wasn't for her protection, and a job she hadn't asked for, translator. Officially, she was assisting him with foreign business. Unofficially, she was under watch 24/7. Still, Elena knew how to adapt. Every night, when the bodyguard switched shifts, she would sit by the grand piano near the window, earbuds in, and pretend to listen to music. Hidden inside the music player was a microtransmitter, a relic from her DOJ training days. Each night she sent encrypted audio snippets to Agent Rivers, recorded conversations, fragments of coded discussions, anything useful. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her feel like she still had control. The penthouse itself was stunning. Minimalist furniture, soft lighting, the faint scent of cigars and whiskey lingering in the air. A place built by someone who understood aesthetics but not warmth. And yet, despite its beauty, she hated how silent it was. The walls didn't just reflect her. They watched her. That afternoon, Silvio came back from a meeting. She could tell before seeing him. The tension in the air changed, his presence like a shift in temperature. He entered without knocking, jacket slung over his shoulder, hair slightly disheveled from the wind. You've been quiet, he said, closing the door behind him. Quiet people tend to live longer, Elena replied, setting her coffee down. He smirked. Maybe, but they also tend to be boring. Then you must hate me already. He walked past her, pouring himself a drink. On the contrary, he said softly. You're the most interesting problem I've had in years. She didn't look at him. You make it sound romantic. Everything is romantic if you're willing to pay for it, he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. She turned then, meeting his gaze. That quiet, calculating stare that seemed to strip everything down to truth. What do you want from me, Silvio? He shrugged. Understanding. You could try a therapist. He smiled faintly. They ask too many questions. So do I. Yes, he said, voice dropping a notch. But you're prettier when you do it. The line should have made her roll her eyes, but instead she laughed, quietly, unexpectedly. He noticed that, and the corner of his mouth curved in satisfaction, like he'd just solved part of her puzzle. Later that evening, while she worked through a list of Russian phrases for the upcoming meeting, Silvio appeared again, this time without a word. He walked past her, sat down by the piano, and tapped a key. The note hung in the air, clean and lonely. You play? He asked. A little. Play something. I didn't realize this was part of my job description. It is now. Elena sighed but sat beside him. Her fingers brushed the keys, tentative at first, then more certain. The melody that filled the penthouse was soft, melancholic, fragile, beautiful. Chopin reimagined. Silvio leaned back, silent, watching her. When the last note faded, he didn't speak for a moment. You surprise me again, he said quietly. It's becoming a habit, she replied. He studied her for a while, then asked, Who are you really, Elena? Her hands rested still on the keys. Someone who stopped believing in justice. That sounds like experience talking. Maybe disappointment, she said. Maybe both. He stood and walked toward the bar, pouring another drink. You talk like a woman who's seen too much. You live like a man who doesn't care what he sees. He turned to her then, glass in hand, eyes unreadable. That's where you're wrong. I care about everything. I just don't pretend it makes me good. She wanted to say something sharp, but the honesty in his tone caught her off guard. Beneath the arrogance, she glimpsed something else, a kind of exhaustion. It unsettled her. He crossed the room, stopping in front of her. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. A silver knife, slender and elegant, its blade reflecting the city lights. He placed it on the piano beside her hand. If you're afraid of me, he said quietly, use this. She blinked, unsure if it was a threat or a gesture. That's generous. It's practical, he said. I prefer people who know they have choices. Even if one of those choices is stabbing you. He smiled faintly. Then I'll die entertained. Elena picked up the knife, turning it between her fingers. It was heavier than it looked, beautifully crafted, clearly expensive. A gift that was both a weapon and a warning. Why give this to me? She asked finally. Because, he said, meeting her eyes, you don't scare easily. And if I ever have to kill you, I'd like to know you had the chance to stop me. The words should have chilled her. Instead, they felt strangely intimate. After he left, the penthouse fell silent again, except for the faint hum of rain against the glass. She stared at the knife for a long time before setting it down next to the piano. Then she picked up her earbuds, plugged them into the small music player, and began transmitting that night's data. Control, she whispered. This is Voss. The meeting's confirmed for tomorrow night. Russian delegation, likely arms-related. Also, she hesitated, glancing at the knife. He's getting suspicious. The radio hissed for a second before River's voice crackled through. Then play along. Keep him close. Elena almost laughed. You say that like it's easy. Just don't get sentimental, Rivers warned. She shut the device off before answering. Outside, lightning split the sky, white against the glass. For a moment, she caught her reflection. The woman she was pretending to be, and the one she actually was, blurring together. When she finally turned off the lights, the knife glinted faintly in the dark, right where Silvio had left it. A promise, a threat, a question neither of them was ready to answer. And as she lay down, staring at the ceiling, one thought haunted her. She was supposed to be the hunter. But somehow, she'd walked willingly into the cage, and part of her didn't want to leave. Rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It hammered against the glass walls of the penthouse like a warning no one could hear. The city below glowed faintly through the storm, a blur of gold and shadow. Inside, Elena sat by the piano, the silver knife Silvio had given her resting quietly beside her hand. It gleamed under the soft light, small, beautiful and heavy with meaning. She hadn't slept properly in nights, not since that moment he told her. If you're afraid of me, use it. Silvio had left for a late meeting. The penthouse was finally silent, and silence for Elena meant freedom. She crossed the room, pulled open the small hidden panel behind the piano, and took out the modified music player, her transmitter. The one she used to send encrypted data to the FBI. Her fingers worked quickly, muscle memory guiding her. She connected the device to the terminal she'd found in Silvio's study. Lines of code scrolled down the screen, shipment lists, account numbers, names she recognized from federal watch lists. Then she saw a folder marked in Italian, Giustizia, Justice. Her pulse quickened. She clicked it open. A man's voice came first, accented Russian. The judge arrives in 2 days. The explosion will be quick, clean. Then Silvio's voice followed, calm, confident, deliberate. Make sure the press sees it. We want chaos, not silence. Her body froze. She played it again, and again. But it didn't change. She opened the attached dossier, hands trembling. The photo loaded pixel by pixel until her heart stopped. A familiar face, gray hair, calm eyes, the same man who used to read her bedtime stories and call her Piccola Stella. The caption, Honor Judge Adrian Voss, Federal District Court, her father, alive. Elena stumbled back, breath shaking. They told her he'd died in a car bombing 5 years ago. Collateral damage from a mafia hit. She'd built her entire life, her entire mission, on that grief. But here he was, alive, and about to be murdered again. She grabbed her earpiece and activated the DOJ frequency. Control, this is Voss. Rivers, do you copy? Static, then Rivers' voice, calm, distant. Go ahead. I found something, she said, trying to steady her breathing. The next target, it's Judge Adrian Voss, my father. He's alive, Rivers. Alive. They're planning, I know. He cut in. She froze. You what? I said I know. His tone was flat, professional, almost bored. We've been tracking that lead for months, she blinked, her throat tightening. You knew he was alive? You lied to me? Elena, Rivers said, lowering his voice. You need to calm down. You're not authorized to open those files. Focus on the mission. You're letting them kill him, she whispered. There was a pause. Then his reply came, sharp as a knife. We need evidence, Elena. Once the explosion happens, we'll have everything. Full authorization for a takedown. The Bureau's ready. You're sacrificing him for proof? Her voice trembled, disbelief turning to rage. You're an agent, he said coldly. Not his daughter. Remember that. The line went dead. Elena stood there, staring at the rain. The glass walls distorted the city lights until they looked like tears. The FBI had lied to her, manipulated her, fed her grief back to her like poison. She clenched her fists, trembling between fury and despair. They used me. They used him. Then, behind her, a soft sound, a click, the quiet, unmistakable sound of a gun's safety being released. She turned slowly. Silvio stood by the door, still in his black coat, rain dripping from his hair. In his hand, her transmitter. Interesting toy, he said, voice low, quiet enough to make her heart race. You've been busy. Her mouth went dry. It's not what it looks like. He turned the device in his hand, studying it. Really? Because it looks exactly like a transmitter, one that's been whispering to the FBI. She didn't answer. There was nothing left to lie about. He stepped closer, measured and calm, the storm outside echoing his movements. Tell me, he said softly, eyes fixed on her. FBI or CIA? Elena swallowed hard. Neither. Try again. She drew in a breath, voice trembling but defiant. Just a woman who lost her father. For the first time, his expression flickered. A crack in the mask, confusion, disbelief, something human. Your father? He asked. She nodded. The judge. The one you're planning to kill. He's my father. He's alive. And you're being set up. He stared at her for several seconds, then gave a humorless laugh. Nice story. Convenient timing. It's the truth, she shot back. The FBI wants this explosion. They need it. They'll take you down after, and they'll make me disappear with you. He slammed the transmitter onto the piano, the crack echoing like a gunshot. Enough. You think you're the only one they used? She shouted. They lied to me too. They told me he was dead so I'd help them trap you. His eyes burned into hers. You expect me to believe that? No, she said quietly. I expect you to believe that I don't want anyone else to die. For a long time, silence. The storm filled the space between them. Then Silvio turned away, walking toward the glass wall. His reflection stared back at him, fractured by lightning. You should have told me the truth sooner, he said finally. You wouldn't have believed me, she whispered. You're right, he said, voice steady again. Now it's too late, he called something in Italian. 2 guards entered instantly, guns drawn. Don't kill her, he said without turning. Just make sure she doesn't leave. They seized her arms. She didn't fight. Silvio, she said, her voice breaking. If any part of you still believes me, stop that attack. He looked at her then, not as an enemy, but as something he couldn't name. You think you can guilt me into saving your father? No, she said softly. I think you still have a heart. The guards shoved her into the smaller glass room, a space once used to display art, now nothing but cold walls and silence. She pressed her palms against the transparent barrier, watching as Silvio stood alone in the stormlight, his face unreadable. He picked up the broken transmitter from the piano, turned it over in his hand, then quietly slipped it into his pocket. Elena sank to the floor, breath shaking, eyes burning with fury and grief. Somewhere out there, her father was alive. Somewhere out there, the FBI was preparing to let him die. And in here, the only man who could stop it was the one who no longer knew if she was his enemy or his only truth. The rain stopped the next evening, but the air still carried the scent of thunder. From the glass cell, Elena watched the storm clouds drift away, leaving behind a bruised sky. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. Her mind replayed River's voice again and again. You're not his daughter anymore. Every word had burned. Now, as dawn approached, the penthouse was empty. Silvio had gone. He'd taken his guards, his briefcase, and, she knew, the plan to meet the Russians that night. The meeting that would end with her father's death. She had to get out. Elena stared at the lock on the door, then at the vent above her. 10 minutes of calculation, 2 bobby pins, and a hair tie later, the lock gave a faint click. She pushed the door open, silent as breath. The penthouse was dark, the city stretching endless beyond the windows. She grabbed her transmitter, or what was left of it, and slipped out through the service corridor. By nightfall, she'd stolen a car and followed the GPS coordinates from the Justitia file. The location, an isolated mansion overlooking Lake Michigan, one of Silvio's neutral grounds for private business. She drove fast, heart hammering with each mile. Rain began again, light and cold, blurring the edges of the world. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was heavy with smoke and tension. The Russian delegation had arrived, 5 men in dark coats, their accents thick as vodka. Silvio stood at the head of the long marble table, eyes cool, expression unreadable. Beside him, as always, was Lucia Ferri, his personal assistant. Blonde, graceful, and quiet, the one person he trusted completely. She'd been with him since before he took control of the Moretti syndicate. To him, Lucia was loyalty itself, until tonight. One of the Russians passed a small briefcase across the table. Payment for the contract, the man said. The judge dies at 9. You will receive the rest after the explosion. Silvio's jaw tightened. Something in his gut twisted. Elena's voice, her desperate eyes, echoing in his mind. He's my father. For the first time in years, he hesitated. He didn't even notice Lucia watching him too closely. He stood, turning toward the window overlooking the lake. Delay it, he said quietly. The Russians exchanged confused looks. Delay? One repeated. Yes, Silvio said, voice calm but sharp. Until I say otherwise. Lucia's expression shifted, not surprise, but disappointment. She stepped forward, her tone careful. That's not wise, Silvio. The deal's already in motion. I said delay it, he repeated. That was when she sighed. A soft, final sound. Then I'm afraid I can't do that. Before he could react, she drew a small pistol from inside her jacket, pointing it straight at him. The room erupted. Guns came up instantly. The Russians shouted. The guards froze. Silvio's eyes narrowed, voice turning to ice. Lucia, what the hell are you doing? Her smile was small, almost sad. My name isn't Lucia Ferry. It's Lucia Morel, Interpol Counterterrorism Division. She lifted her badge with her free hand, the gold glinting under the chandelier. You're under arrest, Silvio Moretti. And so is your friend at the FBI who's been feeding you information. Rivers, Silvio breathed, realization hitting him. She nodded. You think you've been working against the law? No, you've been working for them. Rivers has been running both sides, selling intelligence to us, laundering evidence through your network, and using you to take out competitors. He's cleaning house, Silvio. And tonight, you were next. Silvio's face hardened, fury rising like a wave. You set me up. No, Lucia said, stepping back. He did. I'm just here to finish it. At that moment, the mansion lights flickered, then cut out completely. Chaos erupted. Shouts, gunfire, the sound of shattering glass. Outside, Elena crouched behind the stone wall, soaked from the rain, clutching a pistol she'd stolen from one of Silvio's guards. She'd arrived just in time to see the power die and the windows flash with muzzle fire. Her pulse raced. Somewhere in there, her father's life and Silvio's were colliding in one bloody storm. She slipped through the back entrance, moving fast through the dark halls. The air reeked of gunpowder. A guard lunged at her. She hit him once, hard, and kept going. Down the corridor, she saw a flash of blonde hair, a glint of metal. Lucia. The woman was shouting orders in perfect Italian, her voice commanding, professional. Interpol, Elena realized instantly. The scene in the main room was madness. Russians shouting, guards firing. Silvio ducked behind a column, returning fire with cold precision. Lucia stood in the open, yelling into her comms. Rivers, target is contained. Move in, Rivers, Elena froze. Then, from the shattered window, headlights cut through the dark. Black SUVs, federal issue, rolling up the driveway. The FBI, everyone down! Lucia shouted. Bullets tore through the glass. The Russians went first. Silvio's men fired back. The mansion became a symphony of chaos, thunder, glass, screams, commands. And through it all, Elena ran toward Silvio. He saw her first, disbelief flickering in his eyes. You shouldn't be here, he shouted, firing at a shadow behind her. Neither should you. She yelled back. He grabbed her arm, pulling her behind the overturned table as another volley of gunfire hit. You were right, he said between breaths. Rivers. He played both sides. She met his eyes, and for the first time, there was no mask between them. Then we end this. The door burst open. Rivers entered, flanked by agents in tactical gear. His voice boomed across the hall. Drop your weapons, FBI! Lucia turned instantly. About time, she snapped, but Rivers wasn't smiling. He raised his gun, not at Silvio, not at the Russians, but at Lucia. You talk too much. The shot hit her before she could move. She dropped instantly. The room froze. Jesus Christ, one of the agents whispered. Rivers lowered the smoking gun, his voice cold. She was never supposed to make it this far. He looked at Silvio. And you were supposed to die tonight. Elena's blood ran cold. You lied to me, she said, stepping forward, gun trembling in her hand. Rivers looked at her, calm, almost paternal. You were useful, Elena. You got close to him. You gave us everything we needed. Everything except your soul, Silvio muttered darkly, eyes narrowing. Rivers ignored him. The explosion goes on schedule, he said. The judge dies, and with him, every thread tying us to this operation. Clean, final, perfect. Elena's heart broke, not from fear but from fury. Don't do it, she warned, voice shaking. Rivers raised his gun toward Silvio. "Goodbye, Agent Voss." The world slowed. The sound of rain, the smell of smoke, the flicker of light, everything blurred into one heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, Elena moved. A single gunshot cracked through the night. Rivers staggered, eyes wide, a red bloom spreading across his chest. He fell without a word. Smoke curled from Elena's pistol. Her hands shook. Silvio stared at her, stunned, breathing hard. "You—" he started, voice breaking. She looked at him, tears cutting through the soot on her face. "You saved me once," she whispered. "Now we're even." For a moment, silence filled the ruins of the mansion. The sound of gunfire fading, sirens distant, the rain returning. Then Silvio stepped forward, pulling her close, his voice a low murmur against her hair. "You just made yourself an enemy of everyone." "I was already one," she whispered back. Outside, the FBI floodlights cut through the storm. But inside, amid the smoke and wreckage, two people stood together, the criminal and the agent, both betrayed, both hunted, both finally on the same side. The gunfire faded into the rain. The mansion on the shore of Lake Michigan burned like a wound in the night, its reflection trembling on the dark water. Sirens wailed in the distance, FBI, Interpol, local SWAT. It was over, or so they thought. Elena stood in the chaos, smoke rising around her, her pistol still warm in her hand. Rivers lay on the marble floor, his lifeless eyes staring at nothing. Silvio was beside her, breathing heavily, blood on his sleeve but still standing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The truth was in the silence. Everything they'd believed in had shattered. He looked at her once, an unreadable expression flickering in his eyes. Part gratitude, part disbelief, part something else entirely. Then, through the smoke, the flash of headlights. Tactical vehicles closing in. "Go," she said urgently. "They'll kill you." He shook his head, wiping blood from his temple. "You just killed your boss. You'll need someone alive to tell your story. I can handle it." "No, you can't," he said, voice low, steady. "They'll chew you up and spit you out." For the first time, she saw something in him that wasn't arrogance. It was fear, not for himself, but for her. She wanted to speak, to stop him, but he moved before she could. He grabbed her by the wrist, pulled her toward the shattered balcony doors. "Go, Elena," he said again, this time softer. "You don't belong in this kind of ending." She looked at him, rain and tears blending on her face. "Neither do you," he smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why it works." Then he turned and ran. Through the flames, through the chaos, disappearing into the darkness beyond the broken glass. Moments later, the entire West Wing exploded. The shockwave threw her to the ground, the sound drowning out the sirens and screams. When she opened her eyes, all that remained of the mansion was fire and smoke curling into the storm. Silvio Moretti was gone. Morning came gray and heavy. News spread fast. Massive mafia raid ends in Lake Michigan firefight. The headlines were glorious. The FBI called it the most successful anti-crime operation of the decade. Interpol issued its own statement hours later, calling the mission a joint victory. The name Elena Voss appeared in every article, usually accompanied by the words hero agent or undercover success. But Elena knew the truth. Rivers was dead, officially branded a traitor who'd been secretly working with the Moretti crime family. Interpol took credit for exposing him, while the Bureau washed their hands clean, claiming Elena's discovery had allowed justice to prevail. The real puppet masters, the ones who'd ordered Rivers to let her father die for political optics, were nowhere in the reports. They were untouchable, invisible. They'd turned corruption into theater, and she was just another actor who didn't realize she was part of the script. At the medal ceremony, she stood among polished shoes and camera flashes, wearing her best neutral smile. The director shook her hand, told her she'd done her country proud. Every compliment felt like glass in her throat. When it was over, she walked out into the cold air, the applause fading behind her like an echo from another life. They'd found no trace of Silvio's body. Divers searched the lake for days, dragging sonar lines through the murky depths. Nothing. The FBI declared him presumed dead after 48 hours. Interpol didn't even wait that long. His empire collapsed overnight. Assets frozen, properties seized, allies arrested. But none of them spoke. The few who survived swore Silvio had vanished before the explosion, walking into the night as if the world had no claim on him. Elena didn't know what to believe. She told herself he was dead, that it was easier that way. But some nights, when the wind off the lake rattled her windows, she swore she could still hear his voice in her head. "You don't belong in this kind of ending." A week later, she went to Washington. They'd transferred her to the Bureau's main office, a reward, they said, promotion. She called it exile. Her new office had no windows, no personality, just fluorescent light and the steady hum of machines. She spent hours going through reports, cleaning the aftermath of Operation Justicia, erasing details, rewriting the narrative, building the illusion of victory. One night, she opened the final file. It was a transcript from the Interpol debrief, Lucia Morel's final mission notes, recorded before she died. Target: Silvio Moretti, confirmed as primary link between European crime syndicates and U.S. laundering networks. Secondary objective: identify and dismantle FBI involvement in unauthorized intelligence sharing. Note: Agent Rivers believed he was untouchable. He underestimated both the girl and the man he used. End of file. Elena closed the document and stared at the screen. For a long time, she didn't move. Then she whispered, "You didn't underestimate him. You just didn't know him." Her father recovered slowly after the attempted bombing, saved ironically by Silvio's hesitation. The news never mentioned her connection to him. It was easier to call it coincidence. When she visited him in the hospital, he looked smaller, older, but his eyes were still sharp. "They said you saved me," he told her. "I tried," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "That's all that matters." But as she left the hospital that day, she knew he didn't believe the official story either. He'd been a judge too long not to recognize when truth had been rewritten. Months passed. The world moved on. The headlines faded. The Bureau turned her into a poster child, brave, brilliant, loyal. She became the face of an agency she no longer trusted. Every time she gave an interview, every time she smiled for a photo, she felt the lie tightening around her neck like a collar. At night, she'd go home to her apartment overlooking the lake, the same lake where he'd disappeared. Sometimes she'd sit by the window, fingers tracing the silver knife he'd given her, still sharp, still polished. She couldn't throw it away. It was the only proof she had that not everything between them had been false. Then, one night, 3 months after the raid, she got a package. No return address, no markings, just her name, handwritten in ink she recognized. Inside, a small water-damaged music player, the same kind she used to send transmissions during her undercover days. It was cracked, scratched, but functional. She plugged it into her laptop. The device played a single audio file. "Hello, Agent Voss," or should I say, Elena. A familiar voice, low, calm, with that faint Italian cadence that haunted her dreams. "You were right about everything. Rivers was never the top. There's another name, someone higher, someone your bureau won't touch. If you want the truth, you'll have to find it yourself. Don't trust anyone in Washington." A pause, then a faint chuckle. "And next time, don't shoot my people unless you have to." The recording ended with a sound. Wind, waves, the faint hum of a boat engine. Elena sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. Her heart raced, not from fear, from something far more dangerous. Hope. He was alive. The next morning, she stood by the lake where the mansion had burned. The ruins were gone now, replaced by the dull skeleton of an investigation site, yellow tape, government warnings, silence. The water shimmered under the cold dawn. She took the knife from her coat pocket and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it. Then she threw it into the lake. It sliced through the surface cleanly, vanishing without a ripple. Goodbye. she whispered, but even she didn't know whether she meant it. Behind her, a voice drifted through the mist. Faint, teasing, almost impossible. "Careful, Elena. You'll run out of things to throw away." She froze, heart stuttering, and turned. There was no one there. Just fog, and yet she smiled, because for the first time in months, the world didn't feel empty. Later that day, she filed her resignation letter. She didn't tell anyone why. The Bureau would spin its own story, as it always did. Maybe they'd call her unstable. Maybe they'd promote her legend further. It didn't matter. For once, she didn't need their version of truth. She walked out of the building without looking back. The city was loud, alive, imperfect, exactly how she wanted it. Somewhere across the ocean, maybe in Rome or Venice or some nameless island, a man she was supposed to hate was still out there, chasing his own redemption. And maybe someday, their paths would cross again, not as agent and criminal, not as enemies or lovers, but as two souls who'd survived the same storm and learned the same truth, that justice and love were never clean. They were choices, costly ones. Elena looked out at the horizon, wind in her hair, rain threatening once more. For the first time since it all began, she didn't feel trapped between worlds. She was the storm now, and for once that was enough. A year passed, though for Elena, it felt like a lifetime lived in fragments. The Bureau had erased her name from the headlines months ago. The hero agent became yesterday's story, another file buried in archives no one read. She didn't fight it. She'd had enough of lies dressed as patriotism. When she finally left Washington, no one stopped her. Maybe because they thought she'd break without them. Maybe because she already had. She traded her gun for silence, her badge for anonymity, and her past for the illusion of peace. Venice seemed like the right place for someone trying to disappear. A city that lived half in light, half in reflection. A labyrinth where even ghosts could get lost. Her apartment sat above a narrow canal near the Ponte dei Sospiri. It was small but warm, filled with soft shadows and the smell of salt and thyme. Every morning, she'd wake to the sound of gondoliers calling across the water, their voices echoing off centuries-old walls. Tourists filled the streets, unaware of the city's quiet melancholy, its endless dialogue between beauty and decay. Elena blended in easily. She taught English to art students at a small language school near Piazza San Marco, spent afternoons sketching at cafe tables, and evenings walking through the alleys, pretending the past was a story that belonged to someone else. But some nights, when the mist rolled low across the canals and the bells of St. Mark's Basilica tolled in the distance, she could still hear it, his voice, his laughter, his impossible calm. Silvio, the man who'd lived between sin and sincerity, who'd taught her that justice and love were two words that never meant the same thing twice. He was gone, of course. The world believed he'd died in the explosion. Even she had tried to believe it. But there were moments, fleeting, impossible moments, when she'd catch a familiar silhouette in a crowd, a man in a dark coat standing too still at the edge of the piazza, and her breath would hitch before reason returned. Ghosts didn't wear Italian leather. One foggy morning in late spring, the postman left a small, unmarked envelope in her letterbox. No return address, no stamp, just her first name written in narrow, deliberate handwriting. She turned it over in her hands, curiosity and caution warring inside her. Inside, a single sheet of paper. No signature, no explanation. Only 10 words, scrawled in ink that had bled slightly into the paper. Justice is an illusion. But you made me believe again. Her fingers trembled. The air seemed to shift, heavy and electric. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. She stared at the letter until the words blurred, then folded it carefully, as if it might vanish if she blinked too long. He was alive. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window overlooking the canal, the letter lying open beside her. The water below reflected the soft gold of the street lamps, rippling with every passing gondola. The city was quiet, but she felt watched, not in the way she used to fear surveillance, but something gentler, stranger. Part of her wanted to run, to find him, demand answers, scream, hit, forgive. Another part of her, The part that had learned what survival cost told her to stay still. People like Silvio Moretti didn't write letters unless there was a reason. She poured herself a glass of wine, leaned back, and tried to convince herself it was just closure. A final echo from a past that refused to die. But deep down, she knew better. The next morning, Venice was draped in mist so thick it blurred the edges of reality. Elena walked to the small cafe near her apartment, the one with cracked tiles and espresso so strong it could raise the dead. She sat at her usual table by the window, sipping slowly, pretending to read. The cafe was quiet. A couple argued softly in French. A waiter hummed to himself. Then the bell above the door rang. She didn't look up right away. Not until she felt the subtle shift in air, that prickle of awareness that came from years of reading danger in silence. When she finally lifted her eyes, she saw only the back of a man in a dark coat, tall, composed, ordering something in perfect Italian. Her pulse quickened. "Don't be ridiculous," she told herself. "It's not him." He paid in cash, thanked the barista, and turned slightly. For one impossible moment their eyes met. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe it was just the light. The man smiled faintly, a ghost of recognition, then walked out into the fog. Elena sat frozen, her coffee untouched, her heart racing in that strange rhythm between fear and longing. She wanted to chase after him, but by the time she stepped outside, he was gone. The canal shimmered with mist, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. Weeks passed. Life returned to its slow rhythm, yet small signs began to appear, too small to be coincidence. A book on her doorstep, a rare edition of the Divine Comedy, in Italian, the same copy Silvio once quoted from. A music box left on her table at the cafe, playing a soft Italian waltz she'd played for him on the piano that night in the penthouse. Once, late at night, her doorbell rang, but when she opened it, no one was there. Only a single white lily, still wet from the rain. Venice became a stage for ghosts. Each time, she told herself it didn't mean anything. Each time, she failed to believe it. One evening, near the anniversary of the raid, she walked alone along the canal. The sky was turning from gold to indigo, the air thick with the smell of water and distant perfume. She carried no bag, no phone. She didn't need them. As she reached the Rialto Bridge, she stopped. Across the canal, on the opposite bank, a figure stood half-shrouded by shadow. Tall, still, watching. Her heart stopped, then raced. The man didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there, the faint outline of a coat fluttering in the wind. The lamplight caught the edge of his face for a second, the line of his jaw, the glint of dark eyes she could never forget. "Silvio," she whispered. He didn't answer. She took a step forward, then another. The gondoliers between them laughed, unaware of the invisible thread that had just tightened across the water. A boat passed, breaking her line of sight for just a moment. When it cleared, he was gone. Only the shadows remained. Later that night, back in her apartment, she sat by the window again, staring out at the canal. The fog had returned, soft and silver. On the table beside her lay the letter. She read it again, mouthing the words quietly, like a prayer she didn't want answered. "Justice is an illusion. But you made me believe again," she smiled sadly. "You always were a liar," she whispered. "But you never lied about that." A breeze slipped through the open window, carrying the faint scent of salt and smoke. Familiar, impossible. She closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. In another part of the city, hidden in the maze of narrow canals, a man stood at the edge of a bridge, half hidden beneath the hood of a dark coat. He watched the light in her window flicker, then fade. In his hand, a worn pocket watch ticked quietly, a relic of another life, another time. When the watch struck midnight, he turned away. A passing gondolier caught his reflection in the water, dark, calm, unreadable, and crossed himself without knowing why. The man disappeared into the mist, his footsteps echoing softly against the ancient stones. Venice swallowed him whole. But somewhere, in the quiet rhythm of the waves, a whisper lingered, a promise neither heaven nor hell could erase. Not all ghosts haunt Elena, some just wait. 3 years later, Florence was alive with spring, sunlight spilling across the Arno River, bells echoing through the narrow streets. In a small art gallery near Piazza della Signoria, Elena wandered quietly between rows of oil paintings, her eyes tracing the brush strokes of strangers who had turned pain into beauty. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding either. The past had become something softer, like a scar she'd learned to live with. Then, near the end of the hall, she stopped. A single canvas hung apart from the others. It was unsigned, painted in muted tones. A woman standing by a window overlooking a canal, her reflection blurred by the rain. But it wasn't the painting that stopped her. It was the small inscription hidden in the corner, barely visible beneath the varnish. For the one who taught me to believe again. So her breath caught. The world seemed to tilt for just a second. She smiled. That quiet, knowing smile that carried both grief and grace, then whispered, "You never could resist being dramatic." Outside, the church bells rang again, their sound mingling with the laughter of tourists and the murmur of the city. She turned toward the open door, sunlight glinting in her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't look back, because some endings, she realized, aren't about closure. They're about continuation, the kind only love, loss, and memory can write together. And somewhere, in another city, under another name, a man in a dark coat might have smiled too, knowing that even from the shadows, she still saw him, the end. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this journey through Whispers in Italian, a story of love, betrayal, and the price of redemption. If this tale touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like, share your thoughts, and subscribe to Veil of Hearts for more stories where love and destiny intertwine in the quietest corners of the soul.